Olá, pessoal! Estamos aqui no Avenue Connection, o maior evento do Brasil para quem investe no exterior. Eu sou a Juliana Benvenuto, coordenadora de treinamento e conteúdo da Avenue, e eu estou aqui com um convidado super especial. A gente está começando o Connection, ele foi um dos primeiros speakers e é o Bill Capuzzi, CEO da Apex. Pessoal, eu vou passar aqui para o inglês agora para conversar um pouquinho com o Bill, porque ele não fala português, então vou dar sequência aqui. Vamos lá. Hi, Bill. It's such a pleasure to have you here at Avenue Connection.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, with all your experience, the panel was really great, actually. And so, first, I want to have your thoughts on the importance of having events like this for investors.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be down in São Paulo. We were talking before. It's been a little over 10 years since the last time I was down here, and it's amazing to see the evolution of the city. It's grown tremendously, and the infrastructure is quite different than it was the last 10 years. Yeah, look, I think the world, when you think about retail investors, people that want to build wealth for their future, the world has shrunk, right? And so this notion of, okay, you're in Brazil, you invest in the Brazilian market, you invest in fixed income, and only inside this country, or the same for a U.S. investor, just invest in the U.S., right? There's a lot of opportunity from a global perspective. And what's really important is through the advisors, through the end customers that are part of the Avenue family, is really kind of opening people's eyes up to what are the opportunities that are out there. And I think through a relationship that Avenue has with Apex, it provides the opportunity for Brazilian investors to start accessing whether it's public markets, right, equities, fixed income, ETFs, mutual funds in the United States, or private investments, right, alternative investments that are really attractive in terms of building real wealth.
Perfect. Since you mentioned people tend to invest in their home country, Brazil actually have one of the biggest home buyers in the whole world.
Yep.
So what piece of advice could you give to Brazilian investors?
Yeah, it's a great question. Part of it is just, it's an old adage, but diversification is creating a portfolio that isn't necessarily concentrated, not just about equities versus fixed income, but then you start thinking about diversification in terms of global presence, global allocation of assets. And again, I come from the U.S. Apex is predominantly focused on the U.S. market. The opportunities for expressing your investment thesis as an individual, the opportunities in the U.S. market are tremendous, right? Think about the wave of AI. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, but the number of companies, either privately or publicly, that are doing amazing things in the U.S. So you think of somebody like NVIDIA, or you think of a company like CoreWeave, getting access to those companies and investing in those companies, really important, right? To have the ability to do those things.
Yeah, and you mentioned the U.S. market, but through the U.S. market, investors can actually access not only American companies, but also companies from all around the world. We usually say that the U.S. is a financial hub of investments.
Yeah.
So what's the importance of the U.S. market for the investors all over the world?
Yeah, look, it continues to attract entrepreneurs, founders from all over the world, right? So you think about Jensen Huang comes from outside of the United States. Elon Musk didn't come wasn't natural, isn't a citizen of the United States. And it tracks that talent because it provides opportunity for entrepreneurs to launch these businesses. And as a result, you build these amazing companies, which then present opportunities for investors like you and me to get access to that. The second part of it is the asset management world in the U.S. So you think about the BlackRocks. So the principal is here. There's a number of different asset managers that are represented at this conference. They've built ETF mutual fund complexes that don't just represent the U.S., right? So there's a series that you can invest in the U.S. ETF that give you global exposure, right? Which I think is really important, back to the diversification point.
Great. So how significant and representative is international investors in the U.S.? Because we know Brazilians still invest a lot here, but we do have international investors in the U.S.
Yeah.
What is the importance?
Well, so let's start with, you just look at the U.S. markets. Let's talk about the government bond market. Roughly 25% of the U.S. government bonds are owned by international investors. On the equity side, it's roughly a third. Roughly 33% of U.S. stocks are owned by international investors. So as far as the market goes, which is part of the reason that we work with a bunch of Brazilian companies, really important to the vibrance, to the liquidity, to the transparency in those markets, to continue to lean in and provide access from companies and individuals outside of the U.S. in, right? Which has really been a big push for Apex to help Brazilian companies that are in turn helping Brazilian individuals get access to the U.S. markets. And historically, it's been hard, right? You think about how do you get from real to dollars? How do you make that money movement? How do you open an account if you're an individual in Brazil? How do you get an account open on the U.S. side? And this is where the relationship with Avenue, so they have the relationship with the Brazilian, the citizen here, the investor. Apex provides the sort of rails to get into the U.S. in a safe, secure way.
Great. And let's talk about dollar index. This year, the dollar has suffered a little bit when we compare it to other currencies, even the real.
Yep.
So, but still, it's like the dollar is the currency of the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about the importance of the dollar.
Yeah, look, this year has been tricky. There's lots of geopolitical gyrations, and I think it's caused a lot of volatility in the markets, right? So the lots of conversation around tariff. We have some conflicts around the world, and I think with some of those movements around the tariffs, some of what's happened related to inflation, right, coming out of the other side of the pandemic, just like a bunch of countries, the U.S. government pushed a lot of money into the system to keep U.S. Citizens sort of moving along. It's now playing out the other side, which is inflation is up. It's starting to come down. Interest rates are high as a result. And now you have on top of that this tariff, a lot of the tariff conversations amongst countries. It's not surprising that the U.S. dollar is down. With that said, it continues to be that, like you said, the gold standard from a currency perspective. And my expectation, what will happen short term, is that there'll continue to be some of this, I'll say, volatility related to the tariff conversations. It'll settle down. And again, really a good place, say the gold standard, but U.S. dollar will continue to be sort of that gold standard in the industry, or, around the world.
And it's not the first time we've seen this volatile market. I mean, we had the pandemic not so far ago, and then we had the 2008 crisis.
Yeah.
Actually, that time the dollar index went to the bottom.
Yeah.
I think it was like 72 or something like that.
Yeah.
And investors tend to panic on those moments. We've seen that a lot. People tend to sell when the market is going down.
Yeah.
And so what can you say to investors when it comes to these periods of time where we see a lot of volatility in the markets? And what should they do? I mean,
Nothing.
they should, good.
I mean, to the extent that they have a diversified portfolio, to the extent that they have the right time horizon in terms of that portfolio, right? So if you're a young person, you're in your late 20s, early 30s, you have 30 years ahead of you in terms of investing before you have to start thinking about retirement. What happens over the course of this, this period of time, really in the big scheme of things doesn't matter, right? I think as you get older, right? Obviously, you need to protect those assets, in which case you have to create different portfolio, be more in fixed income, less sort of exposed to volatility. But for young people that are listening to this or watching this, nothing, right? I think, stay true to that sort of, that portfolio, that growth portfolio that you're in, and understand that, people that sell out at these times, like let's take that blip that happened in April. Markets sold off pretty significantly. And if that moment you decided, oh my goodness, I have to get out, right? Now look at the markets today. You would have missed, a 25% move, right? From the bottom to the top. And what typically happens is people get nervous. They make a decision to get out of, whatever, and in that case in April, to where it is today, the S&P is an all-time high. You would have missed a massive move in the market.
Yeah, sure. Do you think Americans are more prepared for this than Brazilians? I ask that because of, well, you have a more matured market. We do have some political issues here and everything.
Yeah.
So, do you see any differences between American and Brazilians on that?
I think the financial literacy, there's been a lot of push around teaching people the markets, including all the fintech companies that we support, the eToros and the Weebles, the Stashes, the Robinhoods of the world. We've done a better job of educating young people about exactly this, which is, stay true to your investment thesis, right? Don't necessarily make sort of, dramatic changes. And I think it's happening here as well. Like through our relationship with Avenue, we see the same thing happening, which is that financial literacy, the education is continuing to get better. And that's part of it is people need to understand that the markets will go up and they will go down, right? That's part of the way that the markets work. And when there's volatile times, really it's that kind of set it and forget it, is really don't look at it every single day, because that's when people make bad decisions.
Yeah, pretty good advice.
Yeah.
And last but not least, I want to talk about AI.
Yeah.
We've seen AI changing the world, as we know, like in the past couple of years, few years.
Yeah.
And how is AI actually changing the financial industry? How do you see the next few years ahead?
Yeah. So I think every single aspect of the financial industry will be affected over the course of the next 5 years, right? So from customer service, how does an end customer interact with their advisor or their broker? That interaction will be different, right? And you think about how if you were to call up or try to get to somebody at Amazon, there's this, this self-service, right? And I think that's what people want, is some ability to self-serve and not necessarily have to wait to get somebody on the phone. And the tools are just getting better to provide that. The second part, I was talking about it in the panel, just the velocity of developing new product, the ability to sort of get faster in terms of the engineering, building code. There's roughly, the estimates are somewhere between 25 and 50% more efficiency in terms of building new product, which is pretty amazing. Right? And you think about just how that advisor interacts with the end customer. The tools there in terms of how often do you talk to that end customer, providing them sort of feedback in and around their portfolio. Every part of what we do as an industry over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, I think AI is going to touch in a meaningful way.
Pretty good. And if investors want to invest in AI thesis, they don't find it in Brazil. So it's actually in the US, and we've seen AI going up a lot. NVIDIA actually went for a $4 trillion dollar size. So
well, and there's back to the ETFs is you can invest in individual names like NVIDIA or CoreWeave. There's a few other companies, but now there's ETFs that are created in and around AI, which I would strongly encourage people to look at the ETFs, because it provides sort of a broad-based sort of investment. If you want to express your investment, sort of thesis in and around AI, there's a number of ETFs that are available that give you access to, all the different AI companies that are out there.
Yeah, and especially because a lot of people don't actually get the chance to, I mean, see the companies and see the numbers and everything. So it's better to diversify in something like that. So yeah, perfect. Well, Bill, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very great insights here. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bom, pessoal, continue nos acompanhando aqui. Esse foi o papo com o Bill Capuzzi, CEO da Apex. E os conteúdos vão estar todos disponíveis para vocês, então não perca, continue nos acompanhando e até a próxima.